So let's get started. Welcome to the storage breakout session. Whenever someone asks me, what are you most excited about in terms of technology, I always say storage. So it's a pleasure to be here with some storage experts today to dive into this topic. Could you all briefly introduce yourselves and where you work, as well as why you do the work you do?
Thanks, Laurel. My name is Bill Hetherington. I'm the CEO of Bandera Electric Cooperative. Does everybody know where Bandera is? Okay, we have a few. Good. I joined Bandera in 2013. I've been electrical engineering is my background. I've been in the technology and renewable energy sectors as well as electric utilities for most of my career. Happy to report that in 2016, we launched BEC Solar, and we provide rooftop solar and ground mount solar for our customers. We also provide power walls as well as other energy storage in coupling with that. It's been interesting to watch it migrate from pre-Winter Storm Uri, where 40% of solar had a battery, to after Winter Storm Uri, where 80% have a battery. And I think that's going to continue. We also have fiber internet to the home, not only to the home, into the router. And so we are a very progressive utility. We've also developed a real-time energy platform, which allows the customers to see their usage at the appliance level, device level in real time. And we just recently published a paper, thanks to the folks at IdeaSmiths here at UT Austin, on what was going on behind the meter during Winter Storm Uri, which is very interesting from an impact standpoint, and I think it does going to paint of how we need to address energy going forward. So I'll just leave it at that. Pass it on.
Hello, my name is Sol Bobst. I'm president of Solar Ranch Development Company. I want to thank Zpryme again for putting on a great conference here and inviting me to speak. I focus on utility scale development of solar and storage in the Texas ERCOT market. I've been working with landowners, building a portfolio with them at the grassroots level, helping represent them across the state, and have about several hundred megawatts of potential capacity and build, to having great conversations with sponsor equity right now. So I'm happy to give my perspective on the early stage and thinking about solar and storage, or storage standalone at the utility scale level today. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Judy McElroy. I serve as CEO for Fractal Energy Storage Consultants. Fractal started back in 2013 as really the first energy storage consultant in the industry, back in a time when nobody really cared so much about storage, and it was awfully expensive to even begin to even think about. We've worked on over 600 utility scale projects to date, so the company has a significant amount of experience. We certainly have a leg up on others, both domestically and abroad. And we specialize in a lot of services to help developers, EPCs, and utilities, and some of those things are doing project analysis, procurement, contract support, a suite of owner's engineering services, and then we do a significant amount of due diligence to support M&A activity in the market. Thank you so much for having us here today. We look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. The hype around storage has really increased in the past few years. How do you think that perceptions have changed around storage recently, especially after the winter storm?
Okay, well, I'll start. My perspective is going to be from the customer standpoint, and I can tell you with data that the interest in energy storage has gone exponential. And while, certainly it may not be as economical as a utility scale project of any kind, whether it's solar or generation of any kind, really, scale, of course, is more economical. What's interesting is people want independence, they want their control, and they want information. Okay, and so what we have done is we provided a platform which allows the customer to become better educated about their energy usage. And we've seen our customers save 20% on their energy because they now understand for the first time, oh, that's how I'm using energy. I had no idea. And while we talk a lot about energy storage and solar, which are very important, the first piece is energy information and understanding. Until people understand and take seriously how they are using energy and understand how they're using energy, we cannot build our way out of this. What we found during Winter Storm Uri was at the peak of February 15th, 2021, air conditioning load, heat load was 500% above normal. Now to put that in perspective, we hit our system peak at 12:50 a.m. Okay, and it was 30% higher than our all-time peak, and it was still going up when the lights went off. I venture to say that looking at the data, and we've analyzed this data, is even if natural gas had been available, most likely the distribution grids would have melted because of the demand of energy. What we have to realize is energy efficiency is the first step. Once you have a building envelope that's energy efficient, then solar and storage can be applied in a most economical way, providing both economic return and independence. So I think from my perspective, that's the lessons we've learned from Winter Storm Uri, and that the interest in storage and solar is only going to continue to go up.
Well, I heard it said best, I think, this morning during some of the start-up presentations where they looked also at ERCOT's future studies, saying the real integral need and requirement, I would put it in my takeaway words, of storage being needed to support the renewable portion of the grid that is going to be replacing the retiring coal plants. So absolutely, since Winter Storm Uri, or just predicting as we add more renewables to the overall mix of the growing gigawatt pie of energy in Texas, energy storage is a part of that. From the early stage development on the utility side, I can say that the solar and storage together as a development project versus standalone energy storage have some different approaches and questions from those early stages, and I can talk more about that later. But it's absolutely an integral part, and we're learning a lot more on how we make those work versus 5 years ago where people had well, how is this really going to work? How do we deploy and look at it? More projects have been implemented. Judy can talk about those, I think, strengths and challenges of we actually know now the what-if questions that were asked by investors or people backing the financial support of getting these out. So that's helping a lot, and it's definitely a part of the Texas pie, and how it'll work when you're starting a project or what questions you want to ask if you're involving energy storage can depend on if it's in combination with a renewable or standalone.
Right now in ERCOT, there are 41 utility scale storage systems that are operational. And that amounts to about 870 some megawatts of operational batteries. And then there's roughly about another 700 megawatts that are already synchronized, and they could come online at any minute. So that's a really large fleet of batteries in ERCOT, and we've had a lot for a while now. And most of those batteries are doing ancillary services. In fact, about 99% of them are doing ancillary services, like faster regulation and spinning reserves, which we call responsive reserve service in ERCOT. And it's a really great gig for a battery because you basically sit around and get paid to do nothing most of the time and be on standby. And 1% of the time or 1% of the year you get deployed, and on average you get deployed for about 10 minutes. Well, during the winter storm, it was the first time in about 10 years that we saw a responsive reserve event or call that lasted for over an hour. It was about an hour and 24 minutes to be precise. But that didn't really matter. The batteries did their job, they discharged, and whether they were an hour duration or a 2-hour duration, which is sort of the current recipe given the revenue profile in ERCOT, they did their job. But once they discharged, they were out of juice. and they had to sit idle pretty much for the remainder of the week, if not into the next week. And that's because there's currently right now in ERCOT in Texas, there's a subsection of the PUC rules that says that, during an emergency event, batteries cannot buy energy from the grid. So we, unfortunately, a lot of these batteries that were discharged and out of energy, they had to sit there and idle, and they couldn't respond to additional ancillary services dispatch. So it was very unfortunate because of that. Now, if you looked and saw some of the articles that were in the news, there was some companies that claimed to have made a killing with their batteries in the market. Now, maybe if they were co-located with solar, they were able to keep charging and discharging. But for most of the clients that we represent and having real conversations off the record, it was really more of the opposite, where there was a lot of lost revenue and even some episodes of having to beg and barter just to get enough energy in the battery to get SOC in a healthy place. So there was a little bit of a kind of a negative experience because of that. Now, and then I guess a lot of the other batteries in ERCOT are also hedged too. And that's a very common practice, not just with storage, but with other resources. And if you own a battery and you have a hedge, you receive a contracted price for the battery. And then in exchange or return, you pay whatever the market price is. But during the winter storm, the prices in the market were an order of magnitude higher than what a normal hedge agreement would account for. And if those batteries would have been able to keep working in the market and doing their job and performing ancillaries, they could have evened out some of that exposure. But unfortunately, because they couldn't charge back up, they had to take the burden of the full loss. So it definitely has been an eye-opener to see how it's going to impact the future of some of these hedge structures moving forward. So it was a really interesting experience.
Okay, I'm just going to make one comment, observation. Unlike the energy storage during Uri at the utility scale, what was interesting to watch as people's behavior is they treated their electric vehicle like they treated a gas vehicle. And everybody's preparing for the storm, and so guess what? Everybody is charging their electric vehicle while the price is $9,000 a megawatt hour. Not a good idea, okay? So it gets back to the education. We need to educate people. Your electric vehicle, you're not driving it anywhere. You don't need to be charging your vehicle, even though just that mindset of preparation for an emergency event gets people, I better charge my car. Not a good idea. Anyway, that's just one unusual observation also on that.
There's something wrong with this.
Just
That's
off.
okay, yeah. So going off of Judy's point, it seems like regulation is a persistent barrier for storage. What about the regulatory system do you think needs to shift in order for storage to really explode in its potential?
Right. There's always stuff happening on the regulatory scene, and yes, there's always barriers to entry, especially for storage because it is a newer technology. If you look at the U.S. as a whole and all the individual ISOs and RTOs, there are all the individual markets. There's been a lot of activity and a lot of rulings that have happened because of FERC. FERC rules like 841, 845, 2222. Unfortunately, even though there's been all of this action, it really does take a lot of time to implement those rules. So depending on the market, the project location, and the relevant market, they could be there could be barriers that were instantly removed, or there could be a few years wait to be able to really take advantage of the full value proposition of putting in storage as it relates to interconnection costs, resource registration, and of course, market participation. Here in ERCOT, I'd say that the biggest kind of regulatory debacle that's happening right now is with distribution connected batteries. There are a lot of distribution connected batteries in ERCOT. And when I say distribution, I'm specifically talking about all of these 9.9 megawatt resources. So if you are less than 10 megawatts you get to have a faster interconnection process, a less expensive interconnection process, because in the eyes of ERCOT, you are considered DG, or distributed generation. And because the revenue in ERCOT is really driven by ancillary services, and they're very finite markets, everybody wants to climb over one another to try to get to the front of the line, get in the market as fast as they can. So this DG approach has been hugely important to realize some of the near-term revenue. But unfortunately, what's happening is that depending on where the battery is connecting, and when you are a DG, you are subject and beholden to whoever the DSP is and the terms of their interconnection tariff. And what we've seen over the last 18 to 20 months in Texas is that there's been nonstop fighting and dockets that have been opened up at the PUC, where you have Mr. Developer on this side of the table making a complaint to the PUC because this particular DSP is trying to charge them extra costs, both upfront and monthly, to interconnect their battery. Now, according to the rule book in Texas, batteries are supposed to get non-discriminatory grid access. And they're also considered wholesale load, meaning they get wholesale storage load treatment, and that means they get to charge at whatever the local nodal energy price is. And that's happening, but then the DSPs are coming in on top of it. They're sort of going over the top, and they're saying, hey, that's great, you get wholesale when you're charging, but because you're in my neck of the woods, you're also going to pay these upfront charges. There's going to be recovery charges, and network connection, network recovery, and they go by lots of different names, these charges. But what happens is it can completely turn the economics of the projects on its head. So there is a lot of back and forth happening in the PUC. It's not the first. There's been many, like I said, over this past 2 years. But what really needs to happen right now is there needs to be clear and consistent rules as it relates to distribution connected resources in Texas. So that's what I'm hoping will come of this latest PUC proceeding.
I'll share a similar concern about just transmission and distribution grid stability and the future of how ERCOT's going to operate with the infrastructure we have now and what it's going to be as we see more distribution projects as well as large renewables. There's always interest in being as close as you can to a load zone, so I have interest from groups that want to be really close to Austin or Dallas or Houston, and sure, that's a great opportunity, but so that competes with every other development in the land. And then we have also South Texas or West Texas, where we have that challenge of getting the power to where the load zones is and what those costs are. So questions on if I do a DG project or several in an area, don't have to go through ERCOT, but I don't want landowners or stakeholders to go bust or have something not work, either from an economic pricing perspective or creating a load that would otherwise not be there. You know, there's that red face test. Yes, we can all do under 10 megawatts and just deal with the transmission company. But if you get 100 of those in an area peppered because it's nice, then ERCOT's really got to think about that too. So I think that's the red face test. We have to be responsible with what we develop. And also the pricing is still complex. Judy understands it better than I do, but that question of, okay, if you can't get the price you want, or you have a major event like Uri versus a hot summer maybe where you could model better, okay, buy low, sell high during certain periods of time of use rates. You know, those are still questions, I think, that are being modeled better. We have some more data, but how do you figure that out? So if we have some, hopefully more granularity from the PUC and ERCOT, how we'll play with all this together, that'll be helpful.
Okay. Okay, so I am a DSP, so I'll got to make things interesting. I think that
case.
I will. I think though the first thing that I will point out is that ERCOT by design has never been supposed to be regulating distribution companies. All right, so they're just wholesale transmission. Guess what? There's 150,000 rooftop and ground mount solar that ERCOT has no idea what's going on about. because they're on the rooftop and they're on the distribution grids. That amounts to several thousand megawatts of energy that ERCOT is not aware of. That's growing at an exponential rate. And while I certainly appreciate the wholesale storage arbitrage model for ERCOT, what is happening at the grass level and at the ground level is not being noticed. And we require real-time energy management every 5 seconds. So if you want to interconnect to my system, I'm responsible. I'm the fiduciary for that electric system. And so I establish the minimum requirements based on my PE, what my electrical engineer and National Electric Safety Code requires. I'm following the law. I'm following my requirements. Now, some people will say, well, that's not fair. You shouldn't charge me. I'm just following the law, and my law requires me to upgrade because of your device. So what has to happen is we do have to have, I think, regulatory intervention at the PUC or at ERCOT to say, okay, guys, are you going to address this, or are you just going to let this thing crater off the edge? Because, what's happening is, it's one of those things, you're watching the big stuff and then the little stuff's going to just eat your lunch. And that's what we're seeing at the distribution level, almost in combination with that, and this is going to go way off topic. In addition to all this, we also have crypto mines jumping on our systems everywhere throughout the state of Texas. These are large energy loads. We already have a demand issue. We already have too much load. Hello, we need energy efficiency. We need to control what's going on. And if we have no regulatory control over crypto mines, we'll be right back where we were in February 2021. That's my worry, and I'm not trying to be a pessimist, not trying to be the doom and gloom guy, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, and I think that's the consensus or the takeaways from some of the conversation and banter back and forth between developers and the DSPs is like they understand that there is a cost of doing that. It's just the way that developers work. Obviously, there's a long development cycle, and they just need to know about what those costs are going to be earlier on, rather than it being that last-minute surprise at the very end. So I think that's what I'm hoping comes out of this is just, is there going to be a wholesale DG tariff for each DSP? And if so, how is that kind of going to be formulated? What is that going to look like? Is there going to be something a little bit more transparent and a little bit more obvious that can be expected when developers are out there, doing the groundwork for their projects?
No, I would agree with you 100%. I think there needs to be better transparency, and that also carries over to transparency to the end-use customer. They need to understand how they're using energy. Again, 35% of energy loss is energy behind the meter. 35%. So unless we fix that first, we're not really solving the problem. We're fixing symptoms. I agree, absolutely, we need to have transparent rates, and they have to be consistently applied, because I don't want to spend a lot of time and money running down and doing engineering studies and saying, okay, that's $500,000. Well, why didn't you tell me? Well, we had to do the study. So I agree, there needs to be work in progress on that.
Thank you. And I also encourage any of y'all to submit any questions to slido.com. I'm kind of covering it, but slido.com, and then you can insert that number, or we can pass you the mic later. But one final question, and then we'll go into Q&A, is what types of projects do you think that utilities should be focusing on as entry points to storage if they're new to this scene?
What we're doing is what I think most utilities should do. And the step one is to educate the customer base on how they use energy. Again, I'll go back to, we provide real-time transparency to our customers as education. We provide solar, we provide storage, we provide it basically, at cost. We're a nonprofit electric cooperative, right? So we're not driven by profits, we're driven by service. And if I can't provide a good quality service, whether that's a solar storage or through the grid, then I'm not doing my job. So I think what utilities first have to recognize is, let's not be dismissive of solar and storage. You know, look, I used to work in an investor-owned utility, and it's like, it was a pain. We don't want to deal with it. It's just, yeah, why do we have to deal with this? I don't think you guys would agree, right? That's how utilities work. Utilities need to get over it and realize that change is here today, and they got to get here today now, or they'll be gone. And the customers are going to demand that information. It's their information, it's not the utility's information. And that's that struggle of, well, that's my meter data. No, that's my energy data. So it is kind of a challenge, but I think electric utilities need to really focus more on providing that quality service and education to that customer to help the grid and to help the customer.
I'll add to the theme of education outreach. Just like this meeting and other work, I want to mention Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Lab has a 2020 and hopefully 2022 this year, but a 2020 cost estimate of different utility scale model projects, including solar and storage and standalone storage, which is a great way of looking at the pricing model and the costs of building, and a great resource that I found valuable, as well as I've looked at financial case studies. So your tax money's paid for it. Look at all the great resources at the Department of Energy and NREL. It's great work to look at, as well as the case studies. I think solar and storage as a development partnership together makes a lot of sense. You're adding to being able to recharge something in place. The storage gets the ITC credit if it's with a little bit of the solar versus standalone. So that all, I think, makes sense for the work. Now, we also need the standalone storage by itself, but part of that, and where I depend on Judy and her expertise, is what is it that is sound and smart in terms of making that work, not just for a landowner or developer, but for the grid as an entirety and a whole. Because we see a lot of things in the queue for ERCOT, but the turnover of what's actually built is still in that 20 to 30%. So we need projects that are not just trying to hit financial targets, but make sense for the stability of the grid and the future of all the projects. So yes, I want to help my stakeholders and investors meet their targets, but we have to think about storage, especially in the Texas market, holistically, in a smart way that meets all the financial goals, as well as keeps the grid running and everything we want solar and storage to do together.
In the beginning, there's always the utility storage pilot. And this pilot always ends up taking about 5 times longer than it should, and about 5 times more expensive once you add in all the incredibly high administrative overhead of planning and planning to have meetings and meetings to have more meetings, and every single person has to touch it and bless it and understand it. And so the first step that I would always tell as utility is, can you get a grant or some free money? Or if you're a regulated utility, can you go and get rate base approval for a certain amount of funds to be innovative and put a pilot in? Because boy, are those pilots so expensive. It's an experiment, and there's a lot of learning, a lot of stakeholder stuff. So that's always my first step. Once you can get a utility through a pilot, then their future really depends on what kind of utility they are. Are they allowed to own storage, or are they not allowed to own storage? Are they regulated or deregulated? Do they have the ability do they have a real-time trading desk and an experienced team, or do they have a generation fleet that they're bidding into the market, or do they not? So all of those types of things are going to influence how strong or weak the value proposition of storage is. Storage doesn't make sense for everybody. That sounds kind of terrible for me coming as a storage consultant, but it's not for everybody. I was at a conference last year, and we were giving out these T-shirts, and the T-shirt had a picture of Mr. T on it. And it said, "I pity the fools still doing fossil fuels." And it was funny. But then I had a girl come up to me, and she's like, "Oh, it's really great that you have a T-shirt, and it's got a picture of Tupac on it." And I was like, give me that T-shirt back, because this T-shirt, you don't deserve this T-shirt. Not everybody understands how to use storage, nor do they have the ability to really take advantage of storage. So it's not a solution for everybody. But for those it does make sense, it could have a significant benefit. Going back to the question, you were asking, tell me again, I drifted off. I was thinking about the A-team and just...
What type of projects?
Okay, so I would say once you get through the pilot, it's really about having the utility try to avoid some of the pitfalls. Some of the biggest pitfalls I'd say, is one, having them understand costs. See way too many utilities trying to look at storage from a levelized cost of energy perspective. Storage doesn't generate energy or electrons. You have to do more of a levelized cost of storage or capacity. I like to do a true total cost of ownership analysis. That's baking in the CapEx and the OpEx, and the OpEx could be wildly different depending on the vendor and the nature of the project. Secondly would be making sure that they understand the equipment supply landscape. I see a lot of just careless mistakes being made where somebody decides to put in a 1-hour battery versus a 2-hour battery because the economics say a 1-hour battery is better, but then it turns out they don't realize that a 1C battery costs incredibly more than a C over 2 battery, or there's less providers in a certain space. The same thing with microgrids. They don't understand all the extra parts and pieces and engineering complexity and protections that are needed to put in a microgrid, so they end up blowing their budget. Same thing with procurement. Every day I see RFPs out from utilities that are just getting started on storage, and they put out very ambiguous RFPs. You have to be able to tell the sellers and the suppliers in the market, where is your point of delivery in your POI? Where is your point of measurement? How much usable and guaranteed power do I need? How much usable and guaranteed energy do I need? Do I want to maintain it? Do I want to let it degrade? How long of a term? And what is the use case? So we need to get utilities into a better position to where they can articulate what they need. Unfortunately, the opposite is true. Most utilities put out a solicitation for storage, and they're like, well, just tell me what the price is going to be for 365 cycles a year, and then once we have it in the ground, our team is going to figure out what to do with it. So we have to get them into a better position, and then the same thing with performance guarantees. Things like performance guarantees and delays guarantees, the utility really has to be able to create the baseline for those and manage the guarantees and the LDs and all the commercial terms, not just simply use whatever the supplier is bringing to the table.
I think one of the things that will pull the utilities in is electric vehicles, and we haven't really talked about that energy storage. But looking at the data that I've seen, electric vehicles, they're 3 times the capacity of some of these residential storage devices, and so I think the adoption of electric vehicles is going to force utilities to deal with it. Okay, and I think most utilities that I talk to are looking at it from the electric vehicle standpoint, the electrification side, because that's something they understand. They really don't understand batteries. They don't understand DC. It gets back to the whole thing, well, I work in AC. I don't understand DC. And so I think the electric vehicles will probably be the pivotal thing that will drive utilities into the storage market. It's coming. So.
All wonderful points. We have a question from the audience for Judy. Are you noticing increasing competitions among EMS companies?
Good question. That's the default response, right? There is just a diversification in the supply chain overall. Years ago, if you wanted to put in a battery storage system, a turnkey battery storage system, you would have to go to somebody that was an energy storage integrator. And not just an energy storage integrator, but we have these vertically integrated energy storage integrators. They'll give you a proprietary equipment offering. They have their proprietary EMS. And their warranty and their performance guarantees require you to typically enter into a monitoring and O&M and maintenance contract with them. And that's the way that it always was. And there was a high barrier to putting storage in the beginning, so that was the only way to do it. But a lot has changed. Now we see way more visibility into the supply chain in Asia. And companies, battery OEMs that once only sold battery racks now sell fully containerized battery systems. So we've seen all of these new companies spring up in the energy storage supply space. Now we have dozens of energy storage integrators that don't have their own equipment offering. They're completely agnostic. They'll put in whatever you want or whatever is the best price or available. Some of these system integrators have their own EMS. Some do not have their own EMS. We also see another kind of category of suppliers we call equipment verticals. These are companies like CATL, BYD, LGES, Sungrow. They'll give you a full turnkey system up to including a medium voltage skid, ultra competitive, and they too may or may not have an EMS. And then just a whole host, dozens of EPC companies that now have taken the front seat and will go out, they will procure disparate equipment, they will procure a third-party EMS, and they will put a wrap on that using their bank sheet. So it's caused a lot of downward pressure on that traditional integrator model. In the EMS space, I can definitely comment on that. I have my hand in a company. We have a sister company, Fractal EMS, that does controls and does project integration. The team put in 2 gigawatt hours last year. They're working on another 4 this year. I think that the EMS market, more companies will come in, but surprisingly, there is a huge difference in the functionality, the features, the capabilities of the EMS providers. Some are a vertical control solution, so hardware and software, monitoring and maintenance. Some are more just providing sort of an optimization layer that sits on top of somebody else's EMS. And then I think just like the regular equipment and development type of part of the industry, it's really based upon relationships as well. I say that because, all the companies that we end up putting EMS in for and doing controls for, those are companies that we have really good relationships for, and we've built a good relationship and confidence and trust by providing them with consulting and engineering services over the years. So it's a great space to be in. I do expect more and more companies to come in, but overall, everyone has their own differentiators and value propositions.
Great question. Yeah.
I want to ask Bill a question. Not because I'm afraid to ask Judy.
That's going to be tough to follow.
When the lights went out during Judy, you said about 30% of your customers had behind meter storage. Is that what I heard initially? What did you see was customer behavior and the battery storage behavior? It was middle of the night, maybe people were sleeping, but did you see anything interesting? Recognizing it was a 4-day event, but did they ration?
Yes, they did. I mean, the key was they have, a mode called storm mode. And so what happens is the battery kind of goes into this storm mode. And so what we did is we started notifying all of our storage fleet, our customers who have battery storage, and saying, now, we need you to discharge, right? I mean, and you need to let it go now, and because you're not going to be able to return that storage charge. So we did capture some very interesting data. I think what we found was at the peak time, we were about $4,300 per storage unit is what it was costing to charge that battery, beginning at $9,000 a megawatt hour. So once we started letting them know to discharge and to get off, that was the thing. So what we're going to be doing going forward is we're coming up with some innovative rates, voluntary rates, and we're talking about this whole energy education and gamification of it. So kind of like what you do with your Apple Watch, it's like, hey, if you discharge now, I'll give you a green star, stuff like that. Because it's real interesting. People this is about behavior change, right? If we're talking about energy efficiency and we're talking about these things at the grassroots level, you've got to change behavior. You've got to resonate and engage with that customer. And so those are the kinds of tools we're going to be looking for. We're rolling that out this summer, where if we call voluntarily through our app, for our Power app, for them to go ahead and discharge, we will pay them. We will pay them credits. And so we're going to see how that voluntary behavior is, and if they respond to a price signal.
So there wasn't a lot of benefit to the customers, mostly to the grid. That's what I'm hearing. But it wasn't really backup storage.
And it wasn't because of it was because of the duration. I mean, it was a week. They're not designed for that. They lasted a day, maybe 2, and they were done. Plus the cycling. Keep in mind, most utilities, we were rotating loads. Now, we have a project that we're filing with FEMA that would help us avoid having to do rolling blackouts in the case we had another Uri, because I would cut off all non-critical loads. So I'd keep heat on and water on, but everything else would be off. So, it will be interesting to see if we can get FEMA to fund that. You were talking about grants, because that's really where this needs to go. These are projects that are costly and take time, but it would be a solution rather than just keep building. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Question. And this is for all technology, but storage specific. I'm a planner, everybody sees things from their perspective, Judy knows me well. But fast forward, assume every home has battery, or we have every distribution feeder has batteries. In my eyes, the bottleneck is going to be the planners and the utilities being able to have the certainty of the behavior, or whether the rate incentive is gonna allow, am I gonna plan with every storage facility or 60% of them charging? Am I gonna be able to control that or not? I feel this is a big bottleneck that we need to work with regulatory to create a market structure or some rules to allow the planners and the utilities to plan for the future. Otherwise, we will see what we saw before of the transmission, where we're studying our system with everything on all the time, like all solar on or all storage charging, which is a handicap for the adoption of technology.
Well, I'll give it a shot. I guess if you're asking me in the future, the way I see it is there are a couple different options. One is, and what we've seen right now is we're trying to learn the behavior. Will people respond if I ask them? Will they respond to a financial incentive if I give them money? And we're going to learn a lot about that. What we have learned with 5 years of real-time data, we're pulling in 42 million bits of data a day, and it's growing. And what's interesting is whether it's weather temperature, square footage per house. We saw in just in a square footage per house during temperature, there's a 21x difference in energy efficiency of a home the same size at the same temperature, 21x. So again, just highlights that energy efficiency issue. But as far as storage goes, I guess I would view that as a utility, if I get to go ahead and put the battery at your house, and I get to control the battery, and I'm somehow compensated for that capital, I look at the battery being an extension of the grid, okay? It's no longer the meter, okay? We're way past that because you have now resources behind the meter. So the grid has effectively changed. The grid is no longer stopping at the electric meter. The grid is now in the house. And so as a service company, I want to be able to help that customer, and I want to be able to control it when I need to, not like the old days of load control when I could hit air conditioners for a financial gain. This is more about an EA3 event where we're got to go in the dark unless I get this stuff down. And so I guess I would hope that there would be some sort of a vision where, we would look at the grid as an extension past and into the home.
Yeah, I was one who always believed that storage is really part of the grid, but now it's more of a resource, but it is a very important aspect of the grid. If we can do that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so you guys, or Billy, you kind of spoke about EVs towards the end there. Looking a little bit farther into B2G, really utilizing that as a part of the grid, is there still going to be, or in the future, are we still going to see large-scale energy storage being put up, or is it going to be more focused on B2G? How does that kind of look?
I think all of the above. I think you're always going to have, I think the storage prices continuing to go down, technologies continuing to get better as far as energy density and its throughput on the large scale, and you're going to have economics making more sense. I think at the grassroots level, at the individual level, people like the independence. They like having the, you see the F-150 Lightning commercial where they, hey, you can power the house, and you can run, buy some tools, That resonates with people. I think that's saw that there's 250,000 F-150 Lightnings back ordered, and they've now stopped taking orders because they can't deliver. So, but I think it's going to be a combination of both, but I think it's real, and it's going to get here a lot faster than people think. And so, you know, we now is the time to start figuring it out. Good question.
I think that we're going to see more large-scale storage, in my opinion. There will always be subsets of developers and subsets of suppliers that will target the grid edge. But as you get smaller and smaller in a system size, the cost per unit goes staggeringly higher and higher. So if you were a utility, for example, and your underlying objective was to peak shave, maybe against 4CP here in Texas, you could put a whole bunch of tiny little batteries at a much higher price point per unit basis, and then there's also the soft cost of customer engagement and customer retention. And we've seen a lot of companies kind of come and go in that behind-the-meter residential space. It's really hard to scale businesses in the behind-the-meter space. It's hard to achieve profitability in the behind-the-meter space. Whereas with bigger storage systems, you know, if you put in, let's say, a 20 or a 50 megawatt size battery, that could be 15 to 20, even 25% cheaper on a per unit basis than putting in a 10 megawatt battery, and even higher than that if you go down to a 1 megawatt battery. So, you know, it's a difference of having to deal with customer behavior, customer engagement, customer retention, or just plopping down a big old battery where you know that you have firm dispatchable power by pushing a button. So I think I like the innovation that we see in the industry. I love the diversity. I love the different sizes, but it does take a lot more work and a lot more cost to achieve the same thing, comparing a lot of small resources aggregated to compared to a bigger resource. And we just don't really have the rules in place to allow aggregation of really small resources like you do in other states. We've tried and failed a few times in ERCOT through the stakeholder groups to be able to aggregate resources. You know, you still have to be a minimum of 100 kW. You have to meet telemetry requirements. That's added cost. And a lot of these small residential and distributed systems don't have that type of makeup. So because of that, I'm sure we'll see a little bit of it, but for it to be really mainstream, I don't know. Most of the people that are putting in batteries and rooftop solar, they're either in Austin Energy, where they have a killer tariff structure to incentivize rooftop solar, or they're just people that are affluent and they want to put on their Facebook page that, hey, I got a battery in my garage and it's right next to my Tesla. It's even going into some of the islands in the Caribbean where they have bad power quality and they're getting 5, 6, 7, 8 outages a day. Even there, where it financially and physically hurts them because of the power outages, it's still just the wealthier people that have batteries. Batteries are expensive, and they're incredibly more expensive when they get small.
I think that's a great way to end this work. the breakout today, because we've gone a little bit over time. But thank you so much for y'all's time, and feel free to come up and greet the panelists or ask any further questions. Thank you.